be done. And therefore, what happens? Wherever the female does not agree, disagrees, has another point of view, speaks against this point of view, it is considered that she is erring. So now feminists have been saying, not just today, but over the last 50 years, as I pointed out to you, that we are not the other. We also have an identity of our own. And we want to retain this identity. So when you read a feminist text, you will see how all these important ideas, tenets of feminism come out. You have to remember these, because when I start looking at the text in detail, these points will help you understand why we consider a room of one's own as being an important feminist text. Look at the slide again. Women have served all these centuries as looking glasses, possessing the magic and delicious power of reflecting the figure of man at twice its natural size. What happens? Through the looking glass. And what do we see? The figure of man is twice its natural size. Who's been looking? Who's been looking? The male has been looking. And therefore, what he sees of himself is of his being larger than life. Feminism believes that this has to stop. We want to be understood, appreciated, heard, read. We want to write as ourselves, as females. Having said that about feminism, I would like to go on now to the text under consideration here. What is the title of the book? A Room of One's Own. When was it written? When was it published? In the year 1929. What is it? It is actually an extended essay. Why am I calling it extended essay? Because it is based on a series of lectures. Virginia Woolf did not write this as an essay. In fact, her lectures, series of lectures at two women's colleges, which I already mentioned to you, were brought together in this form as an essay. What does she do in this essay? What is this essay about? If you were to answer in one line, what is the main theme? What is the main concern? What is the point that she wants to make here? Well, what she does here is to explore historical and contextual contingencies of literary achievement. So she's going to be talking about literary achievement. She's going to be talking about women writers or the absence of women writers. She's going to talk about the advantages that the male writer probably had. And she's going to talk to us about the disadvantages that females had because of which they could not write. She's going to take us to the past, not centuries ago, but she's going to go to another 200 years behind to see what was happening, to see why somebody could write the way he did. In fact, she's going to take us 400 years from our present times, 300 from her days, but 400 from our days, to look at the period of the great dramatist, the Bard of Avon. She's going to tell us how William Shakespeare could write the way he wrote, but how unfortunately his sister, Judith Shakespeare, did not become so famous a dramatist. I can immediately hear you asking, well, did William Shakespeare have a sister? Did she live in Stratford-upon-Avon? Or did she accompany him to London when he went there? Was she with him in the theatre? Etc., etc. But come on, my dear students, let me come to Judith Shakespeare later in the text. But she's going to be talking to us about Judith Shakespeare. And let me tell you now, before your curiosity gets the better of you, that she is purely a figment of the imagination of Virginia Woolf. Why does she create it? Why does Virginia Woolf need to create a sister You will know as the text progresses. Let's look at the slide again. What else do we know? Look at the slide again, and you will see that she partly fictionalizes narrative. Can we look at the slide again, please? What we are doing here is she dramatizes the mental processes of her imaginary characters. There are two important imaginary characters other than Judith Shakespeare. I'll talk to them when I look at the text chapter by chapter. But look at the slide again now, and you will see that she fictionalizes the characters. She dramatizes the internal processes, the thinking of her imaginary characters. In fact, if we want to talk about the character, there is Virginia Woolf, the writer, the speaker, the essayist, the narrator, whatever you want to call it. She begins the essay and she ends the essay. The rest of the essay we see through the eyes of, we hear through the voice of Mary Seton. I'll read from the text for you and you will see how she allows this character to speak on her behalf. When we meet this imaginary character, can we have the slide again, please? When we meet this imaginary character, she says we can call her by any name. Mary Seton, May Seton. But when she does this, when she shifts the identity, it makes us believe that it is a universal voice. You can call me by any name, she says. Call me Mary Seton. Call me Mary Beton. It really doesn't matter. Now, having given you a background to the age, to Virginia Woolf, to the text, to feminism, I would like to take you through the book chapter by chapter. So let's go to chapter 1. My dear students, I'm following the edition, which is a very, very old edition, which is called the Penguin Modern Classics Edition, Virginia Woolf, a room of my own, a room of one's own. I'll give you some page numbers, but I'll be giving you the chapters also. So what you could do is, you could go back and look at the text. When you're listening to the lecture, maybe you could just jot down the page number that I'm saying. The page numbers in your edition may be different, but it would be interesting to go back and read it. The chapter begins with, call me Mary Beton, Mary Seton, Mary Carmichael, or any other name you please. It's not a matter of importance. Why does she say that? Let me begin at the beginning. Chapter 1, a room of one's own. But you may say, we asked you to speak about women and fiction. What has that got to do with a room of one's own? Remember, it's a lecture delivered at a girls' college. I will try to explain. When you asked me to speak about women and fiction, I sat down on the banks of a river and began to wonder what the words meant. They might mean simply a few remarks about Fanny Burney, a few more about Jane Austen, a tribute to the Brontes. My dear students, remember, she is now mentioning names of women writers. Not imaginary women writers, but real women writers. Who are they? Fanny Burney, Jane Austen, Miss Mitford, Mrs. Gaskell, George Eliot, the Bronte sisters, etc., etc. She finds that if she starts looking at the title, Women and Fiction, when I look at the title, you may have meant it to mean, she says, women and what they are like. Or it might mean women and the fiction they write. Or it might mean women and the fiction that is written about them. Or it might mean something that puts all these three together. she then decides that this is not going to take us anywhere. So she says, here then was I. Call me Mary Betton, Mary Seton, Mary Carmichael, or by any name you please. It is not a matter of any importance. Sitting on the banks of a river a week or two ago in fine October weather, lost in thought. That collar I've spoken of, women and fiction. The need of coming to some conclusion on a subject that raises all sorts of prejudices and passions bowed my head to the ground. So she's sitting there on the beautiful lawns of an imaginary university. She calls it Oxbridge. Need I tell you how she came to that name? Think of the two most famous universities of England. Even today, but certainly it has been famous since centuries. Think of those two universities and you would know how Virginia Woolf has given a name to her imaginary university. So, sitting on the lawns of Oxbridge, she thinks. What does she think of? She thinks of the title, Women and Fiction. And who is this she? Remember, I told you, Virginia Woolf now removes herself from the center, from being the speaker, from being the actual narrator, and she allows an imaginary character to speak. You may wonder why she does this. But my dear students, sometimes writers like to take on a persona. A persona means, see, the writer writes with I, but it's not autobiography. Let me give you an example of a poem that you must have certainly read. I'm talking of T.S. Eliot's well-known poem, The Love Song of Alfred J. Prufrock. Remember, he was an old man. And do you know how old T.S. Eliot was when he wrote this poem? You'd be surprised to know that he was just in his late 20s. So what is he doing? Here is a poet who is not yet 30, taking on the persona of an old man. Now, Virginia Woolf does that. It is Virginia Woolf who is writing, naturally, but she is not speaking. She allows an imaginary character, Mary Seton, May Seton, Mary Carmichael, call me what you will. What idea had it been that had sent me so audaciously to sit on the lawns of this university? She asks, because somebody comes and tells her that only fellows and scholars can sit on this lawn. You are not a student of Oxbridge. You are not a fellow of this university. You are not a scholar here. So you cannot sit on the lawns of the university. My dear students, I hope you understand what she is drawing our attention to. Keep remembering the title of this book that we are discussing today, because that space is very, very important. Can we look at the slide again? I propose making use of all the liberties and licenses of a novelist to tell you the story of the 2 days that preceded my coming here. Let's look at the slide again. I propose making use of all the liberties and licenses of a novelist to tell you the story of the 2 days that preceded my coming here. How bowed down by the weight of the subject which you have laid upon my shoulders, I pondered it and made it work in and out of my daily life. And what is the thesis that she wants to draw our attention to? A very important sentence in feminist writing. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction. Let's look at the next slide. She visits the university, as I told you. She sits on the lawns. She tries to enter the library and finds that there are rules there for women too. What do the rules say? That women cannot go into the library. Women cannot go into the library unless one is accompanied by a male. Can you imagine? She gives us examples from Lamb's writing. She gives us examples from Milton's writing. She gives us examples from Thackeray. She says, when she was told that only fellows and scholars can enter, she wonders what idea it had been that had sent me so audaciously trespassing. I could not remember. As chance would have it, some stray memory of some old essay about Charles Lamb came to mind, about his revisiting Oxbridge, the imaginary university which she is visiting. And then when she comes to the library, here I was actually at the door which leads to the library itself. I must have opened it, for instantly there issued, like a guardian angel barring the way with a flutter of black gown instead of white wings, a deprecating, silvery, kindly gentleman who regretted in a low voice, as he waved me back, that ladies are only admitted to the library if accompanied by a fellow of the college or furnished with a letter of introduction. And then Mary Virginia Woolf says that a famous library had been cursed by a woman is a matter of complete indifference to a famous library. Venerable and calm, with all its treasures safe locked within its breast, it sleeps complacently and will, as far as I am concerned, sleep forever. Never will I wake those echoes. Never will I ask for that hospitality again. I vowed as I descended the steps in anger. Let's look at the slide again. If you can't enter libraries, if you don't have money of your own, how are you going to get an education? There are hardly any libraries that will allow you to come